I think many Christians don't know exactly what to do with this story of a Mary anointing Jesus. It is really uncomfortable because, though we don't want to admit it, the character to which we closely relate isn't Jesus. It isn't Mary. It's Judas. In fact, if we place ourselves in this story, we would be nodding our heads in agreement as Judas casts judgment upon Mary for dumping out expensive perfume on Jesus' feet, the money from which could be given to the poor. We believe that Jesus, too, must have disagreed with what she did, but he loved her so much that in spite of her being a bit of a dingbat, he didn't want to pile on. That's what we're thinking, right? So Lazarus has been raised from the dead in Judea by Jesus. He and his disciples had the courage to go back into the darkness, and where they went, God's light and healing went with them. Soon enough, everything was right as rain again, like before the darkness. It is easy to forget the darkness when you're back in the light, to carry on like nothing has changed. But things are heating up for Jesus. The raising of Lazarus only convinced the Pharisees that Jesus must be eliminated or killed, and Jesus sees the signs, the growing support among key Jewish leadership necessary to make that happen. With this being the case, he sends his disciples out into the surrounding areas of Judea without him, to reach out to those willing to hear the good news, while he remains out of sight, out of the public eye. Maybe he sent them out in pairs, as he did in other parts of the New Testament. Whatever the case, Jesus seems intent that the disciples learn to minister to the people without him being present, as if he is working himself out of a job. But as the Gospels tell us, the disciples have their doubts, and as such, they aren't yet firm believers in what they're doing. They probably feel ill equipped, because I'm sure it was obvious to them that things aren't the same without Jesus present. They never are. In spite of whatever the disciples may have been feeling, news of Jesus raising Lazarus traveled quickly, and people started recognizing the disciples and stopping them, asking them about it and about Jesus. I'm fairly sure that Jesus would have told the disciples to take advantage of those moments, to share the stories, the good news. Don't be afraid to engage with people, and trust God's Spirit inside of your hearts, just as I think He would tell us. If someone needs help or assistance, don't be afraid to offer it. Share whatever you have in those moments and hold nothing back, because God will provide what is necessary. Be with the people in that and every moment. Show them the contours of love. Judas is an interesting character in the Gospels. Some biblical scholars are convinced that he wasn't an actual person, but a representation of the tribe of Judah, hence his name. Representatives of the tribe of Judah were the ones giving Jesus the most trouble and selling Jesus out, just like Judas in the Gospels. As such, we love to look down our noses at the traitorous Judas, but in many ways, he is the most relatable for us if we just take a moment to place ourselves into his circumstance. I'm imagining Judas and Thomas out together walking through the town, having just spoken to a group of people who were curious about the Lazarus story. They were now on their way to Mary and Martha's, and it had been a long day. The sun was growing closer to the horizon. Thomas noticed the air starting to cool, and the smell of his dried and sticky perspiration seemed to be his only enduring witness after a long day. Judas breaks the worn-out silence to tell Thomas that he just feels done. Thomas has no clue what he's talking about. "What do you mean you're done?" "This constantly being on the move," says Judas, "traveling from place to place. Sometimes I just want to slow down, to set down roots again." Okay, I mean, think about it. These guys have been traveling around with Jesus for nearly 3 years, like roadies for his band. Sure, they want to have front row seats to everything Jesus is doing, but I'm sure being constantly on the road takes a toll. But Thomas isn't the most sympathetic ear, and he takes a hard look at Judas. We kind of knew what we were signing up for when we joined Jesus, right? "Did we?" said Judas. "I mean, sure, we all felt it, the light in Jesus the moment we first met him. So it was easy to say yes when he offered to show us the way to live this same light into our own lives. But man, it seems so different with us, or me at least. I mean, I love the man, and he's the reason I'm here. But sometimes it feels as though he's beyond this time and place, like we never truly get to experience it. People are constantly tugging at him, and we're left on the edges, picking up the pieces on the periphery and wanting more. Do you get what I mean? Thomas took a deep breath before responding. Yes, but in his defense, he's trying to show us how to live his way to life, so we're not dependent upon it, and so that we can share it with others. I know that's what he says, said Judas, but it seems he's just fiddling around at the edges when he could do so much more. You've seen what he can do. We both have. The way he affects people. He has the charisma to pull the Jewish nation closer together in a way we haven't seen since the time of King David. Yet he travels around, sharing his vision for life with people, encouraging people to change from the inside out. But he's never really leading. What is he really accomplishing with all he's been given? This is not his destiny. The man is blessed by God, so he needs to rise to his proper station. He needs to stop playing around with this small potato stuff. He just needs to lead. And if he wants to play small, well, that isn't why I'm here. I feel like my life was meant for more. I want to be a part of something bigger. I thought Jesus would lead the way, that he would become this destiny, but he resists it. He even thwarts it. It isn't that I don't appreciate his humility and all, but at some point, he needs to be who he is. That's all I want. That is all you want? Asked Thomas. Yes. I'm the person who helps him become the person he is supposed to be. That is my destiny. Thomas didn't say anything more. Judas couldn't tell if he agreed or not. A few minutes later, they came upon Solomon's Steakhouse, a happening upscale establishment attracting the hip and wealthy power brokers. It's a popular hangout for certain Pharisees looking to rub elbows with Roman authorities. It was becoming a beautiful evening, and their outdoor seating area was packed with the pretty people, all dressed to impress. The music from a bluesy trio of musicians rose above the din as the smell of barbecue and fresh bread filled the air. Hey, do you want to grab something to eat? Judas asked. In there? Are you kidding? No, I'm starving. Let's splurge a little. I have the checkbook, and nobody will know. Anyway, we'll always have the poor. Let's you and I enjoy ourselves just a bit. Thomas looked at him, trying to gauge if he was serious. Some of the other disciples had mentioned that Judas was doing more and more of this, buying little luxuries for himself, taking his piece of the pie right out of the middle, like he really didn't care about anybody else. And it was getting worse. No, replied Thomas, as if to ask him what his problem was. I'm meeting up with the others. Okay, but if anyone asks, just tell them I stopped to talk with some people we met along the way to Mary and Martha's. Tell them I'm preaching the good news. I'll catch up with you guys a little bit later. Back at Mary and Martha's, Martha was running around and making last-minute preparations for company. She gave up on trying to get Mary's help. Mary was in one of her melancholy moods, and therefore about as helpful as Barbie doll arms for getting anything done. Martha resisted the urge to slam things down on countertops as she got ready. Knowing how Mary and Martha operated, Jesus arrived a little early to lend a hand. Inevitably, he would remind Martha that everything would be okay. There is never enough time in this life to spend it fretting. The disciples started rolling in about 30 minutes later, along with other friends. Soon the gang is back together, eating, drinking, laughing, enjoying the time with one another and with Jesus. Everything seems to be back in its proper place. Judas rolled in about 30 minutes late, with a hint of bourbon still on his breath. Nobody but Thomas seemed to notice. For most of the people, it feels like nothing has changed. The Lazarus story foretelling of a difficult road ahead seems to have been forgotten. It seems as though they have all the time in the world, but this is the last time that they will be together in this seemingly carefree way. Mary rolls over in bed. She's been there much of the afternoon, and here's Martha getting ready. Mary has hardly spoken to anyone since Jesus raised Lazarus from the grave. Mary knows she should be up helping, so she pries herself out of bed and starts tidying up, vacuuming the carpet because it requires very little thinking, especially since Martha already vacuumed earlier in the afternoon. When the guests start arriving, she puts on a happy face, letting people in, getting them situated. She notices Jesus talking to folks, laughing and smiling, but his eyes are tired. She desperately wants to let Jesus know that he's not alone, that she sees him, and that she loves him. Lost in her thoughts, she wanders back to her room, hoping to collect herself better. And there she notices an expensive jar of perfume on her shelf. It was given to her a couple years ago as an expression of gratitude by a friend named Shirley, whose husband died unexpectedly. At the time, Shirley was crushed and vulnerable. Mary insisted that she move in with Martha and her for a time until she could regain her footing. She wouldn't take no for an answer. Martha was annoyed, seeing only one more burden on her own life. But this is how it goes when you live with Mary. In the end, it took longer than expected for Shirley to regain her footing, get her reconnected with some distant relatives where she was safe again. In spite of Martha's objections, Mary never wavered. That is just how she is wired. As Mary finally saw her off, Shirley gave her a jar of expensive perfume as an extravagant thank you for Mary's extravagant care, love, and kindness. The gift embarrassed Mary. She never had much and never wore perfume, especially not expensive perfume like this. It was the kind of thing other more important people might wear. Mary knew she wasn't strong like her sister, and in her mind, she hadn't earned such an expensive gift. It would have embarrassed Mary to wear it. In spite of her embarrassment, tears flowed down Mary's face when Shirley gave it to her. Nobody had ever given her a gift like that. So overwhelmed was Mary that Shirley thought that Mary was upset, at least until Mary's laughter broke through the tears. Mary never gave a thought to using that perfume. That would have been ridiculous. Maybe there would be a time when she could pay it forward to someone else, though. Seeing that jar on the shelf brought back all of those memories. In the dark corners of her mind, Mary thought about Jesus' talk of his death, as if it was all but inevitable. She hated when he talked that way, but the way forces seemed to be lining up against him, she wondered if it might come to pass. If so, maybe she would use the perfume then to dress the body. It made her nauseous to even think about it. She thought more about Jesus' tired eyes. Maybe she could give Jesus that same gift of appreciation that Shirley gave to her while he was still alive. Mary took the jar off the shelf and held it for a moment. It was surprisingly heavy. Without removing the stopper, she held it up to her nose. It had a spicy sweetness to it. It was glorious, so luxurious. And in that moment, she knew what she was going to do. Coming out of her room, holding the perfume low in her arms so people wouldn't see it, she scanned the room to find Jesus, then walked over to where he was standing. A few people were standing with him. Before anyone realized what she was doing, she dropped to her knees and dumped the entire bottle of perfume on his feet. Seeing it spill out the way it did, she realized that maybe she hadn't thought this all the way through as it spread across the floor. The others standing nearby backpedaled to keep from getting wet. The overwhelming scent traveled like a shockwave throughout the house as the collective gasp filled the room. Instinctively, she dropped further and tried to corral the perfume with her forearms, and in doing so, her hair fell to Jesus' feet and into the perfume. She then used her hair to mop the perfume back onto Jesus' feet. Watching this unfold, Judas's bloodshot eyes grew wide as he threw up his arms in a show of disgust. "What are you doing, you crazy woman?" Martha immediately looked for a towel to clean up the mess, embarrassed by her sister's actions. But when she heard Judas's words, she wanted to box him in the ears. How dare he speak to her sister like that? Only she gets to speak to her sister like that. He always does that type of thing, reduce an act of love into something worthy of scorn. Martha loathed that man. Mary wasn't quite sure what to do. What started with her desire to show extravagant love and appreciation spilled all over the floor in a big mess. She felt Judas's judgment, as well as that from others in the room. Reflexively, she wanted to shrink away, but then she felt something inside of her welling up, a refusal to give in to his shaming, a refusal to let him and the others who doubted take from Jesus this moment. Tears started running down her face as her resolution took control. She didn't care what anyone else thought. She doubled down, using her hair to caress his feet, his ankles, in between his toes. She held nothing back. There was no part of him that wasn't worthy of meticulous care. There was no humiliation for her that she would not gladly give to show him her love, her appreciation, and how much he meant to her. She was totally, completely, and unabashedly his, and she held nothing in reserve. Others began noticing Mary's care as she cleaned Jesus' feet with her hair, the sensuousness. Martha's eyes filled with tears as her arm holding the towel fell loosely by her side. Her fists started to relax as she began to realize, with admiration, the gift of love her sister gave to Jesus. They all watched Mary's unmitigated love, the beauty of it. Mary, by her love, was turning the room. Whereas they didn't truly understand that moment in time with Jesus, she was starting to show them. They came for dinner and a good time, and she gave them the meaning. This was the love Jesus preached, and just when it seemed as if nobody got it, not one of them, Mary turned water into wine. She transformed that moment, showing God's light in all its glory. Judas, sensing people losing sight of the matter at hand, exclaims, "This has to stop. Do you not see that this was a year's worth of wages, money that could have been given to the poor? Have you no shame, you immodest woman?" Ignoring Judas, Jesus kneels down and touches Mary gently on the shoulder, and she looks up into his eyes. They are no longer tired, but filled with radiance as he basks in the gift of her love. Jesus then turns towards Judas, as if nothing Judas could say in that moment would matter. "Leave her alone. You will always have the poor among you, but you will not always have me." I think many Christians assume that the disciples get it. They are with Jesus after all, so they are hearing the message firsthand. Surely they get it, but they don't. When Jesus returns to Judah to raise Lazarus, God's help, he hopes it will result in belief on the part of the disciples. We like to think that Judas is the only one with doubts, but he isn't. They all have them. All of the 12 disciples. They were all Jewish from the traditions of Jewish thought. And just like Nicodemus, they struggle to escape it. They hear Jesus' words and watch his actions, but they struggle to wrap their brains around what he is saying, the true meaning of his ministry. But we're so different, aren't we? We get it. We know what Jesus is talking about because we read the Bible and we know how the story ends. The reality, though, is that we often don't get it either. Just like the disciples, we think we get it, but we don't. Last month, I was asked what tradition I'm from. What are the core beliefs of my church? Do I believe in predestination? That those who are chosen have already been selected and chosen? What about the Trinity? Do I believe in that? There are all sorts of things like that, things we could use as a litmus test to decide who's in the club and who isn't. What are the core beliefs necessary to make me a Christian? To ensure a person is sufficiently pure so we can relieve God of the burden of judgment, of figuring out who is saved. We're such helpers. It reminded me of Jesus healing the blind man on the Sabbath, and the Jewish leaders exclaiming that Jesus was not a man of God, because such a man would not heal on the Sabbath. I need to know your beliefs before I can interpret your actions, before I lend you my ear, accept the fruits of your life. We love the rules. They simplify our lives so we don't have to think. The authors of the book of John warned about such rules, however, and still we try to impose new rules all the time, things by which we can judge one another, hold others to account by our standards, which we assume to be the same as God's. We make ourselves the arbiters of which rules in Scripture matter and which ones don't. But Mary gets it. In her action, she was consumed by love for Jesus. She emptied herself, of her ego. And because of this, the judgments others have for her didn't factor in. She does what Jesus instructs us to do. She loves. And what does Judas do? Probably the same thing we would have done. He judges her. How can something so simple as love be so difficult for us? A few years ago, I was on the C yard at the prison, having just concluded my remarks, when one of the guys came up to me. He was an older black gentleman with wispy gray Albert Einstein hair and skin faded to a milky brown. The irises of his eyes were an eerie gray. I wondered if he was an albino. His striking appearance reminded me of a shaman, or maybe Moses. I immediately felt comfortable in his presence. I don't recall all that was going on in my life that day, but I do remember being a little bit out of sorts, just trying to get my footing and not distract everybody else with my personal issues. When he approached me, he looked me in the eye like he was trying to see into my soul. I filled the momentary silence by saying hi. Then he asked me a question. One question, that was it. With a reassuring tone, he said, "Do you have peace?" The question caught me off guard. It pierced right through the facade I was trying to maintain that day. I didn't know what to say. Finally, I answered something to the effect of, "I'm trying to. I feel like I'm not succeeding today, though." With that, he simply walked off. He never said another thing. I had never seen that man before, and I haven't seen him since. I'm not even sure he was actually there, but I assume he was. Maybe some of the inmates know who I'm talking about. Still, in that moment, it felt like God was speaking directly to me through him. Like he was saying, "Son, you're making this harder than it is. Let go. It's going to be okay. Love, it is enough."